Okay, so I think we have 15 minutes, sorry, no more. Yeah, 15 minutes to summarize the discussion session. So perhaps we can go in the same order. Let's wait a bit more for people to come back. Is anyone in the breakout rooms? Yeah, there's still people in the other breakout room. But I think because of time, we should try to summarize now. So is Michael Woodbasi here?
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. I was still gathering thoughts. I'm going to say something briefly, and then I'm going to invite Gautam to supplement.
Yeah, so remember it's 15 minutes, so try to be for something like this minutes. Because you have one per session, per breakout room.
Then I yield to Gautam.
Great, thanks for putting me on the spot, Michael. So I think some of the fun points that were raised were services like TNS are very, very useful to the community. And it would be helpful if we broaden their scope to include things like moving objects so that the services were more widely adoptable. It turns out that various groups like FRBs and GRBs are now also able to use TNS and Offer. You can get in touch with Offer if you want to learn how to add TNS support for your community. The other role that TNS plays effectively by giving you a standardized web form and setting up a schema is make things both machine readable and human readable. This is good for the transient community, and it's being effectively imposed by TNS, but it's also being imposed by the schema that's being used in the Kafka packets. And so it's helpful to have that sort of standards for a whole bunch of different groups, rather than trying to pass things like emails or astronauts or GCN circulars in the future, though I know there are some efforts to try to do this with machine learning, like natural language processing. Help me out, folks. Since I wasn't actually supposed to be taking notes last session, please supplement here.
What about what Andy said about a group meeting later?
Yes, yeah. Great point. So Andy, thank you for that, Francisco. So Andy Howell is leading an effort to hopefully maybe put out a white paper or at least start a discussion group about some of the stuff, and you can get in touch with him if you want to join that and you're interested. And Andy, perhaps you can say what you hope the outcome of that group will be.
Yeah, so we'd like to broaden the kinds of things you can report. So it's not just, say, reporting discoveries to a centralized source, but like, let's say, you got data on a particular target, and maybe it's photometry points, maybe it's a spectra, and you want to share that. Or you want to share information about, like, is your instrument available at your observatory on which days, all kinds of things, so that you could have a publish subscribe model so that you can just get the kinds of things that you want to get. These things will be captured in some database. And so we need to have some format that is both human and machine readable, perhaps separate mechanisms for each, or maybe there's some overlap. But the idea is to make more machine readability in transmitting more information, but then subscribing only to the narrow part of information that you want, and then somehow making this available to brokers upstream and to TOMs, so that we can improve our inferences on what things are in real time rapidly.
And again, this is where something like TNS, which is an organization that's one level up, can really help, because both brokers and individual users can report there, and things can be ingested back into brokers from there to define classifications. Another point I'm quickly seeing through Slack is, in addition to sort of information like the availability of instruments and telescopes, there's also now extra information in this brave new world, such as classification probabilities and what classifier can be run. And it seems like Offer and TNS are very open to storing this sort of extra information. So it will be possible to have that information, not just for multiple broker groups, but potentially multiple algorithms in each broker group. That might make things seem a little bit more complicated initially for the end user, because they have so much more information to look at. But we should sort of embrace that chaos initially and trust that it will settle down very soon.
Thanks, Andy. Sorry, I have to interrupt, but we need to move to the next breakout room. Thank you very much. So, Julian?
Yes, I can probably summarize very quickly. All the notes are in the Google document, so you can read them. So the session was about how users will get their alerts. So of course, as Ken mentioned, all those discussions, they are related to one to each other. But we first discussed that we acknowledge the fact that we migrate from a pull model to a push model, where now the brokers push notifications to users. And that changed a bit the way users handle the data and receive the data. Then we discuss the fact that when things are getting complicated, more and more complicated, Kafka can be sometimes daunting. But it's true that it helps also with the volume of data. So it's probably like a step you have to learn to get your data. Then we discussed the relationship between the brokers and the marshal and the Tom, for example, and what they can bring to each other, especially, for example, the web UI user interface that the marshal is developing that can help also users of brokers to to receive data and to play with the data instead of using directly the API or the live stream services. Some people also noted that, their users tend to use mostly web application, websites. APIs are usually used by power users, but not much by daily users. So it's easier the moment you have some web API where people can click instead of a terminal things. But we acknowledge also that there are various communities, and we should not bet all the money on one horse, but definitely if a broker or a marshal can propose many different services, that will help, although that's a burden for them because they have to develop different tools all the time. Yes, sometimes someone highlight the fact that astronomers are paid to do astronomy, not computer science. And in the light of LSST, we tend to use more and more computers to do the science. And I cannot offer any solution here. That's true. In 5 minutes after the end of the discussion, that's what I can offer to you. But there is all the notes, thanks to Rachel, are in the Google document that is available from the Slack. So please read. There are very useful information from the discussion.
Thank you, Julian. What about the reproducibility and legacy breakout room? So Jacob is able to summarize. Jacob.
Sure, I can briefly summarize. There are also some notes in the Google document. Okay, so there was some discussion about whether it's possible, and I think the answer is that it's a requirement for a lot of the analysis that we need to do. So even if it's hard, it needs to be done. Kind of some minimal steps might be that there is a first period also of the real survey that is mainly about gathering data, where reproducibility really cannot be guaranteed, and that might even need to be noted. But let's say after a year or so, one might transition into a different phase. And it's a similar question for brokers, that of course they need to, and I think that's standard now, to store the configurations as containers or whatever, but that there are additional questions whether there also need to be some sort of legacy versions available for these that are running, say, for a season, maybe, or alternative, having some legacy versions of, for example, classifiers that are available for a longer period of time. One option is to have, for example, for classifying, provide multiple models. So one of them might be legacy versions for users where repeatability is really of prime importance, but that are updated rarely, and then other services that are more quickly updated. Then there's also a lot of questions about catalogs and versions of machine learning tools and how these
in themselves need to be kept track of. And this is clearly something that we need to solve. And also in principle, to replay or redo real-time study, all involved real-time data streams need to be available. And that might be the case for LSST, but that's not the case for all the real-time programs out there. But in the end, the conclusion was that that's not really an issue for LSST or the Rubin Observatory. And kind of the final comment in that, in tracking whether some individual transient or understanding why an individual transient was not followed up, there are really very many gaps that need to be considered between alert generated to distributed to received to processed to reacted, to having triggered a reaction, to whether the reaction took place, what the result was, how it was evaluated, and so on. And that in some sense, all of these need to be logged and stored somewhere. So there's lots of things that need work, but there are really no solutions at this point. I think that's it.
Thank you. And we have time for the last session, which was APIs. Who is summarizing?
That's me. I was trying to
Thank you.
describing sort of stuff. Yeah. So the good news is, yeah, all of the brokers are basically providing APIs already or will be in the very near future. We had some discussions about whether we should be trying to work towards a standard supported API for end users to query the brokers. There's a little bit of discussion as to whether the IVOA is working on this, but it doesn't seem like we are. Whether we need something similar for querying brokers like TAP does for querying archives. There was also the question was sort of raised about whether there should be sort of feature standards for distributing light curves. Again, it seems there was a little bit of work on this more than 10 years ago in the IVOA, but hasn't really gone anywhere. But it seems most of the brokers, not all of the brokers, seem to be keen to sort of work together, and there are some efforts apparently going on in CBS already to work on light curve formats, and people should collaborate and converge on something that works for the community. I think that was most of the highlights. Hopefully anyone else within the session will chime in if I missed something.
Okay, so thank you, Tim. And that's perfect because we are finishing on time. So unless there's something else someone wants to say, we should start in 5 more minutes.